My dad chose my sister, funded her future, sacrificed mine, and for years, I believed I deserved it. It took me a long time to realize that I wasn't born broken, I was just treated like I was. When I was 5, I begged my mom to take me to the amusement park. She smiled, said yes, and we never made it. A truck ran a red light. I survived. She didn't. After that, my father stopped looking at me the same way, or maybe he stopped looking at me at all. My older sister, Elise, 3 years ahead of me, graceful, brilliant, became the center of his world. Me? I was just the accident that took everything away. He never said it out loud, but every decision, every silence, every celebration Elise got and I didn't all told the same story. And it all came to a head the day he called a family meeting and erased my future right in front of me. I was 5 years old when I asked for something small and lost something irreplaceable. It was a Saturday morning. I remember the smell of pancakes, the sun streaming through the kitchen blinds, and my mom humming as she cleaned up. I had just watched a cartoon with kids riding bumper cars, and I wanted that too. I tugged on her shirt and asked, "Can we go to the fun park today? Just us?" She smiled, warm, tired but always kind. "Okay, sweetheart, just you and me." Elise, my older sister, was upstairs finishing a school project. She waved us off with her usual elegance, always a little too grown up for her age. We never made it. A delivery truck blew through a red light. One blink, and everything I knew disappeared. The next thing I remember was waking up in the hospital. My arm was bandaged. I had scratches on my face. My sister stood beside my bed, pale and stiff. And my father, he just stood there, silent, cold. He didn't hug me. He didn't ask if I was okay. He just stared, like he was seeing something broken that couldn't be fixed. My mom was gone. I didn't understand the weight of it then, but I felt something shift. My dad stopped being a father and became a shadow. He still lived in the same house, but his warmth was gone. He moved, mechanically cooking, driving, working, but never really being there. It was like I had taken away the only person who made him feel alive. And because I had survived while she hadn't, I became the scar he couldn't bear to look at. Meanwhile, Elise became everything. She was old enough to remember Mom's perfume, her bedtime stories, her hugs. She was old enough to grieve properly. Dad clung to her like she was the last living piece of the woman he lost. He drove her to dance classes, helped her with science projects, bragged about her to coworkers. On my 6th birthday, I got a toy and a nod. On hers? She got a party with 20 kids, a magician, and a photo album titled, "Elise, Our Shining Star." Even then, I started shrinking, quieting, folding myself into corners so I wouldn't upset him further. I began to wonder if love was something you had to earn and if I had already failed. But I didn't know then just how much worse it would get. Not until the day he gathered us around the living room for a family decision. A decision where only one daughter would matter. By the time I turned 11, the imbalance in our home wasn't just emotional, it was institutional. Elise had become a polished, near-mythical figure in our family. She won spelling bees, performed in recitals, and always smiled at the right times. Teachers loved her. Neighbors admired her. Dad beamed with pride at every parent-teacher conference she had. Me? I was there too. I always was. Sitting quietly next to him, my report cards folded in my lap like secrets. He never asked to see them. I don't even think he knew I liked art, or that I was writing stories in spiral notebooks hoping he'd notice. He never did. When Elise got a B in math, Dad reassured her, "You're still brilliant, sweetheart." When I got an A, he blinked and asked if I'd thank the teacher for being generous. It was like my success belonged to luck, while Elise's belonged to destiny. She wasn't mean. That was the hardest part. Elise wasn't cruel, just indifferent. She didn't see the gap between us because, for her, it wasn't a gap. It was normal. She offered polite smiles when I spoke and sometimes complimented my drawings, but I always felt like an outsider in my own home. A ghost, living in the glow of someone else's spotlight. And Dad? He didn't even hide it. The summer Elise turned 16, he threw her a garden party with lanterns and string lights. I helped set it up. I ironed the tablecloths and tied ribbons on the chairs. When guests arrived, he introduced Elise like she was royalty. When one neighbor asked, "And what about your younger daughter?" he laughed and said, "Sarah's the quiet one. She likes books and stuff." That was it. That was all I got. Every small win I had a very poem read aloud in class. Every local art contest I celebrated in silence, alone. No fridge magnets with my name, no congratulations. Just quiet dinners where Dad asked Elise how rehearsals went and told me to pass the salt. Still, I kept hoping. I thought maybe if I worked hard enough, he'd eventually see me. Maybe I just hadn't earned his attention yet. Then came the day he scheduled a family meeting. He said it was about the future. For one brief second, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd ask what I wanted. Maybe he'd finally treat us as equals. But I should have known better. That night, in that living room, my place in the family was decided once and for all. It was a Tuesday evening when Dad called us into the living room. His voice had that serious edge, the kind that made me sit up straighter and Elise roll her eyes like it was another one of his dramatic moods. But he was pacing when we walked in, which meant he had something big to say. We sat on the couch. Elise crossed her legs and glanced at her phone. I held mine in my lap, unread notifications lighting up like I was waiting for someone to rescue me. "I've been thinking a lot about next steps," Dad began. "Elise, with your final year of high school coming up, it's time to plan ahead." I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't say anything. I'd been researching colleges too quietly. Scholarships, community colleges, online courses, anything I could afford without burdening him. I thought maybe, just maybe, this was a conversation for all of us. He turned to Elise. "I've decided we're going to focus our resources on getting you into NYU. Your mom always dreamed of one of you going there." I blinked. "Wait, we?" Elise lit up. "Seriously? You'd pay for that?" Dad nodded. "I'll cover tuition, housing, everything. We'll make it work." My mouth went dry. I waited for him to glance my way, to say something like, "And Sarah, we'll figure out your plan too," or, "Don't worry, we'll support you both." But he didn't. Instead, he looked at me and said, almost like an afterthought, "It just makes more sense to invest where the returns are clearer. You understand, right?" Returns. Like I was a bad investment. I wanted to scream, to ask him if he'd ever even read one of my stories, if he remembered that I got into the same honors program as Elise last year, if he knew I'd been working at the bookstore part-time to save for college while Elise was going to brunch with her drama club. But I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Because that's what I'd been trained to do: accept, absorb, disappear. The meeting ended with Elise already scrolling through dorm layouts and NYU housing guides. Dad was on his laptop, looking at loan options. I walked out of the room without a word. In the hallway, I heard Elise say, "Thanks, Dad. I won't let you down." And then his voice, "I know you won't. You've always made me proud." Those words, "you've always made me proud," stuck in my chest like glass. He had never said them to me. Not once. And that's when something snapped. For the first time in my life, I realized I couldn't live in a house that only had space for one daughter's dreams. That night, I didn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling in the dark, the same ceiling I'd stared at for years, and I realized I'd outgrown this house a long time ago. It just took me until now to admit it. I moved slowly, quietly, like muscle memory. I pulled my old duffel bag from the closet, the one I used on school trips. I folded a few outfits, my notebooks, my laptop. I packed the small stack of letters I'd written but never centones meant for my mother. I didn't take much, not because I didn't have more, but because very little in that house ever truly felt like mine. The only sound was the zipper. I left a note. Short. Simple. "I need space. Don't look for me, Sarah." And then, I walked out the front door before the sun even rose. I didn't have a destination. No dorm waiting, No savings worth mentioning. But I had something new. The quiet burn of dignity. I'd been invisible in that house for years, but out there on my own I could be anything. The first few nights were the hardest. I stayed with a coworker from the bookstore, Jess. She had a futon and a kind heart, and she didn't ask many questions. She just handed me a cup of instant coffee and said, "Stay as long as you need." I only stayed a week. I didn't want to be someone's burden. Not again. I found a room to rent above a laundromat. The floor creaked, and the faucet hissed, but it was mine. I worked more shifts daytime at the bookstore, evenings at a local diner, weekends helping a friend's aunt clean office buildings. My feet ached constantly, my sleep was shallow. But every paycheck, every meal I bought with my own tips, felt like a rebellion. Dad didn't call, Elise didn't text. Not even a, "Where are you?" I'd left quietly, but part of me had hoped someone would notice. They didn't. And maybe that hurt more than I expected, but it also told me what I needed to know. I wasn't running away. I was walking toward a life where I didn't have to beg to be seen. Some nights, I missed Hermie Mom. I'd talk to her in whispers, staring at the ceiling of my tiny rented room, asking what she would have done. Would she have told me to go back? Or would she have helped me pack? I like to believe she'd be proud I left. The months that followed were hard, but they were mine. I learned how to live with less. I budgeted groceries down to the last can of beans, rotated between 3 work uniforms, and learned to make a single dollar stretch across 2 meals. I stopped expecting rest or comfort. But I also stopped waiting for approval. At the bookstore, I got promoted to floor manager after 6 months. It didn't come with much more pay, but it came with something I hadn't felt in years: respect. Jess, the same coworker who gave me a futon and coffee when I left home, clapped for me when the owner handed me the keys. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I just smiled. I was used to holding everything in. I enrolled in night classes at the local community college. English literature and creative writing. Nothing flashy, but it felt like oxygen. After years of hiding my words, I was finally giving them space to breathe. My essays got noticed. My professor pulled me aside after one submission and said, "You write like someone who's lived through too much." I didn't correct her. She wasn't wrong. On weekends, I started attending a writer's group at a tiny coffee shop downtown. There were 5 of us: retired nurse, 2 grad students, a barista who wrote fantasy fanfic, and me. They didn't care about my past. They cared about my pages. It was the first time in my life I was surrounded by people who didn't compare me to anyone. No Elise. No, she's the quiet one. Just Sarah, a girl with ink-stained fingers and stories that finally had a place to land. We started hosting board game nights, potluck dinners, birthday surprises that actually felt like celebrations. It was messy and chaotic and imperfect, and it was more family than I'd ever had at home. I still thought about them sometimes, Dad and Elise. I'd see posts online about her going to NYU, studying fashion marketing, taking internships in glossy buildings I'd never set foot in. Her life looked effortless, curated, like a magazine spread. Mine was held together with coupons and duct tape. But I didn't envy her. Because for the first time ever, no one was handing me anything. And that made everything I built feel real. I had scars, sure, but they weren't shameful anymore. They were proof I had survived. And I had no idea that soon, the very man who'd once erased me would come back, needing something only I could give. It was a Thursday night. I had just closed the bookstore, the bell above the door still ringing in my ears when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Normally, I'd ignore it. But some chill I couldn't explain made me pick up. "Hello?" There was a pause. And then, "Sarah?" My heart stilled. I hadn't heard that voice in 3 years. I hadn't even let myself imagine what it might sound like after all that silence. But there it was, hollow, hoarse, and older. It was my father. I didn't answer right away. He continued nervously. "It's been a while. I wasn't sure you'd pick up." Silence stretched between us like a wire pulled tight. My hand clenched around the phone. What do you want? I said, finally. He sighed. I was hoping we could talk. Elise is having a hard time. Things didn't go the way we thought. And, well, we're in a bit of trouble. There it was. Not, I miss you. Not, how are you? Just trouble. What kind of trouble? I asked flatly. There was a rustle on the other end. Papers? Receipts? She lost her job after the company downsized, he said. The startup didn't take off like we hoped. I'd taken some financial steps to help her get it going. Loans. Equity from the house. Things are tight. I thought maybe you could help. I almost laughed. He wanted my help? After investing everything emotionally, financially, completely into Elise? I felt heat rise in my chest. For a moment I was 5 again, watching my mom wave goodbye through the rearview mirror. I was 16 again, hearing him call Elise brilliant, while I cleared the table in silence. You should ask Elise, I said. She's the one you believed in. He didn't respond right away. When he did, his voice cracked. She can't. She's trying, but she's struggling. We both are. Struggling. Like I hadn't. Do you remember, I asked, when you told me it made more sense to invest where the returns were clearer? Sarah. No, really. I cut him off. Do you remember saying that to your own daughter? Do you know I worked 3 jobs after leaving home? That I slept in a room above a laundromat just to avoid drowning in the shame of being invisible in my own house? His silence was answer enough. I exhaled. You didn't lose me because Elise failed. You lost me long before that when you chose to believe I had nothing worth investing in. I was grieving, he whispered. I lost your mother. And I lost her too, I snapped. But I didn't punish you. I didn't punish Elise. You punished me for surviving. For a moment, I almost felt bad. Almost. Then I remembered my bruised pride, my empty birthdays, the scholarships I applied for without his signature because I was too ashamed to ask. I'm sorry, he said. His voice was soft, shaken. I see now what I did, and I hate it. I truly do. I didn't know what to say. Part of me had waited my whole life for an apology. And here it was too late, too broken, and too full of regret. I'm not your safety net, I finally said. You didn't build that in me. I built it for myself, and it's not for sale. I hung up before he could reply. I stood in the cold, the streetlights casting gold over the bookstore windows. My phone trembled in my hand. So did I. But not from fear. From power. For the first time, I wasn't a forgotten daughter. I was someone who could say no. And mean it. I didn't sleep much that night. After hanging up, I sat on the edge of my bed, the weight of the past 3 years pressing down on my chest like a sandbag. He had actually asked me for help me. The daughter he had dismissed, ignored, erased. But even more disturbing than his call was the growing question in my mind. What had really happened to Elise? A week later, my curiosity won. I reached out to an old neighbor from back home, Mrs. Halpern, who had always been kind to me, even if she tiptoed around Dad's favoritism. We hadn't spoken since I left, but she answered warmly. After some small talk, I carefully brought up the reason for my call. Her voice dropped immediately. Oh, honey, you haven't heard? Heard what? Elise's company went under months ago. Some fashion tech thing burned through investor money in under a year. Your dad was one of the biggest backers. I swallowed. He invested in her? He didn't just invest, she said. He remortgaged the house, took out 2 loans. Word is, he even pulled money from what was supposed to be his retirement. I went quiet. Mrs. Halpern continued, more gently now. I saw him the other day. He looked tired, not just old, defeated. It was hard to picture. My father had always been solid, unbending, cold, yes but strong in his certainty. To imagine him cracked open by consequences? That was new. A few days later, I got a message from Jessmy coworker and closest friend who'd gone to high school with Elise. Guess who I ran into at Union Square? She texted. along with a blurry photo. Elise, in an oversized hoodie, sunglasses perched on her head, sitting alone on a bench with her phone and a cup of cheap gas station coffee. She looked wrecked, Jess wrote. No glam, no makeup. I almost didn't recognize her. I stared at that image for a long time. The girl who used to sparkle at recitals, who once got a birthday party with lanterns and live music, who had been untouchable, unshakable. Now she looked like me, 3 years ago. I thought I would feel satisfied, vindicated. I didn't. I just felt tired. Not out of pity but because I realized that all of us had been caught in the same storm. The pedestal Dad put her on hadn't protected Harriet, had paralyzed her. He'd poured everything into her, until neither of them could stand on their own. But I had learned how to. I didn't call her. I didn't reach out to Dad again. Instead, I opened my laptop and wrote a new story. This time, not for a class or a contest but for me. It began with a girl who didn't know she was allowed to leave. Until she did. Weeks passed. I didn't hear from Dad again, and I didn't expect to. After years of silence, followed by a single desperate call, there was nothing left to say. The hole he'd carved out in my childhood didn't suddenly fill because he'd finally noticed it existed. And Elise never reached out either. I sometimes wondered if she even knew he had called me. If she ever thought about the years she got everything I didn't. If she ever considered apologizing. But the truth was I wasn't waiting for her apology. I wasn't waiting for anyone's anymore. Instead, I was filling my days with life. I finished another semester of night classes both. At the bookstore, I was offered a part-time role running events, like book clubs and author nights. For the first time, people wanted to hear my voice, my ideas. I wasn't the background character in someone else's story, I was the narrator now. I still lived in that tiny apartment above the laundromat. The walls were thin, the window stuck sometimes. But when I curled up with a mug of tea and a book I loved, surrounded by quiet I had earned, I felt something close to peace. One evening, I got a text from my professor. Your short story was selected for the State Lit Showcase. You're in. I stared at it for a full minute, then smiled. Not because I needed anyone to be proud of me, but because I was finally proud of myself. That night, I pulled up my drafts folder and added something to the story I'd started weeks ago, the one about the girl who left. I wrote, she didn't need the people who never chose her, because she had finally chosen herself. That was the truth of it, really. I hadn't healed by hearing, I'm sorry. I hadn't needed them to fall apart to know I was worthy. I had built a life without them, a quiet, beautiful, honest life. And no one could take that from Minot Elise. Not my father, not the ghost of a childhood spent chasing crumbs of affection. I didn't hate them, but I didn't owe them anything either. They had made their choices. Now, finally, I had made mine. And I chose me.